My wife Megan told me she was leaving me while we stood in line for coffee in downtown Austin. Not at home, not sitting down, not in private. We were shoulder to shoulder with strangers, half awake, doing that quiet morning shuffle toward caffeine like it was a shared religion. Between us, the barista called out a name I didn't catch. Behind us, a guy in a ball cap was scrolling his phone, and a woman in running shoes was tapping her card against the counter like she was late for something. Megan didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look angry. She leaned in like she was ordering, and said, "I don't want this life anymore. I'm in love with someone else." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Like my brain had swapped words to protect me. I looked at her face, calm, fixed, decided, and I felt something go hollow in my chest. I didn't say her name. I didn't ask who, because in that moment, I knew the worst part hadn't happened yet. Before that morning, my life felt stable in the way a warehouse floor feels stable, flat, marked, predictable, and built to handle weight. I'm Daniel, logistics manager, not the glamorous side of anything. I moved freight, solved bottlenecks, watched numbers, answered phones, and kept other people's deadlines from turning into fires. My weeks were organized down to the hour because that's what kept things from slipping. Same routes on the screen. Same carriers. Same drivers calling me by first name because they knew I'd pick up. A steady paycheck. Health insurance. The kind of reliability that isn't exciting, but it holds the roof up. We lived in Round Rock in a house that looked like 100 other houses if you drove through the neighborhood too fast. 2-story, beige stone, narrow backyard, grass that never quite decided if it was going to be green or not. I cut it every Saturday morning anyway. It wasn't about the lawn. It was about keeping things maintained. I paid the bills the day they came in. I changed filters before the AC started wheezing. I rotated tires, kept the pantry stocked, fixed the fence latch when it sagged. I thought that was love, making sure the small things didn't fall apart. Megan's world ran on a different kind of fuel. She worked at a creative startup downtown, branding, strategy, whatever title they decided meant more that quarter. She wore sneakers with dresses, carried a laptop everywhere, and spoke in sentences full of words like pivot, and launch, and energy. Her calendar was color-coded like a children's book. She was always on, always one step ahead of where her body actually was. Even at dinner she'd lean forward with her phone beside the plate, screen lighting her face every time it buzzed. She said it was the job. I believed her because I didn't have a reason not to. At night, she'd tell me stories like highlights. A meeting that went well, a client that didn't get it, a coworker who lived for drama. I listened. I nodded. I tried to be the calm place she could come back to. I'd ask if she wanted tea. I'd set the alarm. I'd lock the doors. And honestly, for a long time, it worked. We weren't wild, but we were functional. Quiet weekends, HEB runs, Netflix, friends' birthdays, the occasional date night where she'd look up from her phone long enough to laugh and squeeze my hand like we were still building something together. The warning signs were there, but they were small enough to mistake for stress. A new edge in her voice when I asked simple questions. Little jokes that landed like insults. "You're so predictable," she'd say, smiling, like it was cute. More late nights downtown. More team dinners. A sudden interest in Pilates and boutique fitness classes that didn't include me. New clothes showing up without tags. A faint, unfamiliar cologne note on her jacket one evening that she blamed on a crowded elevator. I noticed those things the way you notice a light on your dashboard, annoying, but not yet urgent. You tell yourself you'll check it later. Because the truth is, I wanted stability more than I wanted the discomfort of looking too closely. I thought being a good husband meant being reliable. Providing, not disappearing. Staying steady even when she was scattered. I believed if I kept my hands on the wheel, the road would straighten out. So I kept driving. After the coffee shop, I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I didn't ask her to repeat herself so I could pretend it landed differently the second time. We walked out with our drinks, stood on the sidewalk while the door swung shut behind us, and then she said she had to get to work. I nodded like that made sense. I watched her walk away before I turned toward my truck. That was the moment something shifted. Not outwardly. Internally. I didn't decide to investigate. I didn't tell myself I needed answers. I just stopped participating. I went quiet in a way that didn't announce itself. No speeches. No sulking. Just a narrowing of focus. Like when you stop listening to background noise and start paying attention to a machine that sounds slightly off. The new phone password was the first thing I noticed. Not because I tried to unlock it, but because she changed how she handled it. Screen down on the counter. Face angled away from me on the couch. A thumb moving faster than before, like she'd practiced. When I walked into a room, conversations ended mid-sentence. Calls got taken outside, even when it was hot, even when mosquitoes were bad. "It's loud in here," she said once, standing 10 feet from me in a quiet kitchen. Her language changed, not dramatically, subtly. She talked about plans instead of our plans. "I'm thinking about going," instead of, "we could go." Trips, weekends, dinners that didn't include me by default anymore. The word "we" started disappearing the way a habit disappears when you stop needing it. I watched timing, departures and arrivals, the way she'd shower immediately after getting home some nights. The way she'd sit in the car for a minute before coming inside, phone still in her hand, like she was finishing something she didn't want to carry over the threshold. None of it, on its own, meant anything. I knew that. I'd built a career on understanding how small delays and minor changes didn't matter until they formed a pattern. So I didn't react to individual moments. I logged them mentally. Dates, times, behaviors. I didn't accuse. I didn't ask for reassurance. I didn't try to earn my way back into something that was already moving without me. At work, I functioned normally. Solved problems, took meetings, sent emails, but in the background, my attention sharpened. Not angry, not desperate, just clear. I realized I wasn't trying to save the marriage anymore. I was trying to understand it accurately. At night, lying next to her, I stayed still and listened to her breathing. I noticed how quickly she fell asleep now, how she turned slightly away from me. I didn't reach for her. Not to test her. Not to provoke a response. I was done measuring my worth by proximity. What surprised me most was the calm. Once I stopped needing her version of things to make sense, my own did. Pieces slid into place quietly. Not with pain, with order. I didn't know where it would end yet. I just knew I wasn't lost anymore. I stopped trying to be convenient. That was the real break, even though nothing on the surface changed. I still woke up at the same time. Still went to work. Still made dinner when it was my turn. But the instinct to smooth things over, to anticipate her needs before she named them, went quiet. I didn't ask if she was okay. I didn't ask how her day went unless she asked me first. I stopped adjusting my schedule around hers like it was the default setting of my life. Megan noticed, but not in the way people notice danger. She noticed the absence of friction. The lack of resistance. When she came home late, I didn't look at the clock. When she left early, I didn't ask where she was going. I wasn't trying to make a point. I just wasn't participating in a version of reality that required me to pretend. Internally, something settled into place with finality. This wasn't a rough patch. It wasn't burnout or miscommunication or a phase we were supposed to muscle through with better conversations and a weekend away. That idea died quietly. No argument, no announcement. Just a clean internal acknowledgement that whatever marriage I thought I was protecting had already ended, and I was the last one still acting like it was alive. Once I accepted that, my behavior became simple. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped volunteering information. I stopped trying to be interesting or supportive or present in ways that required emotional labor. Not out of spite, out of clarity. I conserved energy the way you do when you know a system is shutting down and wasting power won't bring it back online. She filled the space with noise at first. Questions that weren't really questions. "Are you mad? You've been quiet. Is something wrong?" I answered honestly but minimally. "No, I'm fine. Just tired." All true. None of it an invitation. At night, I slept better than I had in months. The anxiety that used to keep me half awake, listening for cues, scanning for mood shifts, dissolved. There was nothing left to manage. Nothing left to fix. My role had ended even if the logistics hadn't caught up yet. I began thinking in terms of separation without emotion attached. Finances, accounts, timelines. I didn't rush anything. I didn't need to. When you stop hoping for a different outcome, patience becomes easy. What surprised me most was the absence of anger. I wasn't furious. I wasn't plotting. I wasn't replaying conversations in my head looking for better lines. I felt detached, but not numb. Like I'd stepped out of a room that was too loud and realized how quiet the rest of the house was. She still hadn't said the word divorce. She didn't need to. I had already accepted the ending before she ever gave it a name. I didn't go looking for proof. That's something people say after the fact to sound disciplined, but in my case it was true. I didn't check her phone. I didn't follow her. I didn't dig through drawers or cloud accounts. I didn't need to. Once you stop pretending, evidence has a way of showing up without effort. It started with receipts. Not hidden. Just left where things get left when someone isn't thinking about being careful. A crumpled restaurant receipt in the center console of her car when I moved it to sweep the garage. Dallas. Weeknight. A place she'd never mentioned. I noted the date. Crossed it with her calendar in my head. Late meeting, she'd said that night. I didn't confront her. I threw the receipt away after memorizing it. Then there was a concert ticket stub in the pocket of a jacket she hadn't worn in months. A band she'd never played around me. The ticket wasn't for Austin. It was for Fort Worth. 2 seats, torn cleanly down the middle like someone had been careful to separate them. I folded it once, then again, then put it back exactly where I found it. The name came later. Evan. It appeared casually, which is how names surface when they've already become normal. Evan said this place is overrated. Evan's team is launching something big. Evan's really good at explaining things. No context. No introduction. Just a name dropped into conversation like it had always belonged there. I didn't ask who he was. I didn't need the biography. I only needed the frequency. I noticed how often his name showed up right before she left the room. How it was followed by a smile that didn't include me. How she never said his last name, like that would have crossed some invisible line. I started collecting moments the way I collect data at work. Quietly. Without attachment. Dates. Locations. Behavior shifts. I didn't stack them into a story yet. I let them sit side by side until the shape formed on its own. There was no rush. Truth doesn't need urgency when it's consistent. One night, she came home smelling like a different soap. Hotel soap. I knew it instantly, even though I couldn't have named the brand. It's thinner, cleaner, temporary. She went straight to the shower. I made dinner. We ate. We talked about nothing. I washed the dishes while she scrolled her phone, face lit blue in the dim kitchen. Later, in bed, she fell asleep quickly. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the rhythm of something that no longer required my input. What struck me wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how little effort it took to maintain once I stopped interfering with it. The story didn't need my reaction. It didn't need my permission. It just needed time, so I gave it that. I didn't confront her. I didn't warn her. I didn't ask for honesty. I let reality keep arriving on its own schedule, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to doubt. It stopped being just my marriage the afternoon Claire reached out to me. Her message came through LinkedIn of all places. No drama. No accusation. Just a short note asking if I was married to Megan and whether I'd be willing to talk. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, not because I was shocked, but because the situation had quietly crossed a boundary. This wasn't contained anymore. It had edges now. We met at a coffee shop near the Domain. Neutral ground. Bright windows. People working on laptops, lives moving forward around us. Claire looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She held her cup with both hands like it was something solid she could rely on. She didn't waste time. She told me she'd been dating Evan for 3 years. That they lived together. That she'd noticed changes too. Late nights. Excuses that didn't quite line up. Trips that were framed as work but never produced anything tangible. She said my name came up accidentally once, spoken too quickly, then corrected. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She was assembling facts the same way I had. Then she told me she was pregnant. Not as leverage. Not for sympathy. Just as context. Something she needed me to understand because it explained why she hadn't brushed off the inconsistencies sooner. She was building something fragile and didn't want to shake it unless she had to. I listened. I nodded. I didn't interrupt. What struck me was how similar our experiences sounded when stripped of emotion. Different details. Same structure. The same gradual displacement. The same casual rewriting of shared reality. The same quiet assumption that we'd keep absorbing it. I didn't tell her everything I knew. I didn't need to. I confirmed enough to align the timelines. Dallas. Fort Worth. The overlaps that removed any remaining ambiguity. She exhaled slowly when it settled. Not relief. Finality. What I thought was my private collapse turned out to be someone else's disaster too. We didn't make plans. We didn't coordinate confrontations. There was no pact. Just an unspoken agreement that we were no longer confused. That mattered more than strategy. When I drove home, the house felt different. Not heavier. Clearer. The problem was no longer personal failure or misunderstanding. It was structural. A system built on omission finally exposed to daylight. Megan came home late that night. She kissed my cheek out of habit. Asked if I'd eaten. I said yes. We moved around each other like coworkers finishing a shift. She didn't know the shape of things had changed. I did. And for the first time, I understood this wasn't just ending. It was converging. Megan suggested closure the following week, like it was a reasonable errand we could run together. She said there was a gallery opening downtown, one of her coworkers had a piece up, and that it might be good to talk somewhere neutral. Not at home. Not across a table we'd eaten at for years. Somewhere public again. I noticed the symmetry and didn't comment on it. I told her that was fine. My voice didn't carry anything extra. No tension. No hope. The gallery was crowded and bright, all white walls and concrete floors, people holding plastic cups of wine and nodding thoughtfully at things they didn't intend to buy. Megan arrived first. I saw her across the room before she saw me. She looked composed, prepared, like she'd rehearsed what she was going to say and believed she was still managing the timing. When she spotted me, she smiled with relief, as if my agreement to be there meant I was still cooperating with her version of events. We stood near a large abstract canvas neither of us understood. She started talking almost immediately. About how hard this had been. About how she hadn't meant for anyone to get hurt. About how life changes and people change and sometimes things just don't align anymore. I listened without reacting, the way you listen to a presentation you already know the outcome of. Then the room shifted. Evan walked in with Claire. There was no dramatic entrance. No pause in the music. They just appeared in the doorway like anyone else. Evan looked confident until he saw Megan. Claire looked calm in a way that told me she'd already passed through shock and landed somewhere quieter. Megan stopped mid-sentence. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I watched Evan register the situation piece by piece, his eyes moving from Megan to me, then to Claire. I could see calculations failing in real time. The story he'd been telling himself didn't fit the room anymore. No one spoke for a moment. Claire broke the silence, not with anger, but with clarity. She said Megan's name. She said Evan's. She said she was pregnant. She said she'd reached out to me because she needed the truth, not a performance. Megan tried to explain. The words came fast and tangled. Context. Feelings. Confusion. She reached for my arm once, instinctively, and I stepped half a pace back. Not dramatically. Just enough. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to add weight to something that was already collapsing under its own. What struck me was how quickly my old role evaporated. I wasn't the husband trying to hold things together. I wasn't the abandoned man seeking answers. I was just present, watching the structure fail because it could no longer support itself. When it was over, when the gallery noise filled the space again and people pretended not to stare, Megan looked at me like she expected something. A response. A verdict. I nodded once. Calm. Final. Then I left. After that night, things unfolded without my involvement, which was the strangest part of all. I didn't have to push anything forward. I didn't have to correct lies or defend myself or clarify what I already knew to be true. I went back to my routines with the same discipline I'd always had, except now they weren't propping anything up. They were just mine. Work, gym, groceries, sleep. The difference was how little emotional resistance there was in the day. No anticipation, no disappointment, just motion, clean and linear. Megan tried to talk the next morning. Not to apologize exactly, but to regain footing. She framed things as misunderstandings, timing issues, emotions that got out of hand. She said she never meant for it to collide like that, never meant for people to be hurt. I listened without interrupting, the way you listen to a weather report after the storm has already passed. Informational. Detached. Too late to matter. When she finished, she waited. I nodded once and went to work. Evan's life unraveled faster than ours ever had. Claire didn't argue with him. She didn't scream or make threats. She just started asking questions in front of other people. Simple ones. Dates. Locations. Names. Explanations that had to remain consistent more than once. They didn't. Friends noticed. Coworkers noticed. The pauses between his sentences grew longer. Silence spread in places where his confidence used to carry him through. Megan watched it all with delayed shock. The version of events she'd rehearsed, private, controlled, sympathetic, never materialized. There was no clean transition, no soft landing. The truth didn't need coordination or careful framing. It didn't need my participation. It only needed space. At home, the atmosphere thinned. We moved around each other like people waiting out a lease. She cried once, unexpectedly, standing in the kitchen while the dishwasher ran. I stayed where I was. Not because I was cold, but because I understood what that moment was actually for. It wasn't grief. It was the loss of narrative control. Stepping in would have been dishonest. I began separating things quietly. Direct deposits rerouted. A new account opened. A lawyer consulted without urgency. Not to punish, to finalize. I wasn't rushing her out or forcing timelines. I was removing myself from future entanglement. That distinction mattered to me more than speed. When people asked how I was doing, I said I was fine, and I meant it in the technical sense. Functional, clear, unburdened by false hope. There was sadness, but it stayed proportional. It didn't dominate the day or distort my thinking. It came and went like weather. The collapse didn't arrive with a bang. It came with paperwork, shortened conversations, and explanations that grew smaller because there was nothing left to justify. I stayed out of the wreckage. I didn't narrate it. I didn't assign meaning. I let it resolve itself the way unstable systems always do once no one is holding them upright. By the time it was officially over, emotionally and legally, I felt like I'd already been gone for a long time. What ended that marriage wasn't exposure. It was gravity. There was no victory waiting at the end of it. No surge of satisfaction. No moment where everything clicked into place and felt justified. That surprised me more than the betrayal itself. I had assumed there would be some emotional payout for enduring it quietly. Closure. Relief. Something that felt like a reward. What I got instead was clarity, and it was thinner and sharper than I expected. The paperwork finalized without ceremony. Signatures. Dates. Copies. The house was listed and sold faster than I thought it would be. We split things cleanly because there was no energy left to fight over objects. Furniture is just furniture once meaning drains out of it. I kept what I needed. I let the rest go. She did the same. There were no arguments over photos or keepsakes. Those had already lost their charge. When Megan moved out, it wasn't dramatic. Boxes. A rented SUV. A few quiet trips up and down the stairs. She hugged me at the door, briefly, like someone thanking a coworker on their last day. I stood still and returned it just long enough for it not to feel hostile. When she drove away, I locked the door and stood in the entryway for a moment, listening to the house settle around me. That was the first time I noticed how quiet it really was. Not lonely, just quiet. I didn't miss her the way I thought I would. I missed the idea of being mirrored by someone, of having another presence confirm my own. But that absence felt cleaner than the constant low-grade tension I'd been living with before. There was no second-guessing now. No wondering if something was wrong. Everything that had been wrong was already accounted for. I understood then that I wasn't leaving as the man who had been abandoned. That version of the story didn't fit anymore. I wasn't pushed out. I had stopped participating long before the ending arrived. I had stepped away internally while everything else caught up. There was dignity in that realization. Not pride. Dignity. The quiet kind that doesn't need witnesses. I didn't talk badly about her. Not because I was protecting her, but because there was nothing left to say that would improve my own position. The truth was sufficient on its own. It didn't need embellishment or framing. People saw what they saw. I didn't correct them. What I carried forward wasn't bitterness. It was precision. A better understanding of my own thresholds. Of how long I'd stayed out of habit. Of how easily stability can turn into inertia if you confuse endurance with commitment. I let myself feel sad when it showed up. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't rush it away. I treated it like any other signal, information, not identity. When it was done, truly done, I realized I hadn't lost myself in the process. I had stopped lying to myself sooner than I gave myself credit for. And that made all the difference. I left Austin 6 months later, not because it hurt to stay, but because there was nothing left there that required me. I took a position with a regional logistics firm in a smaller city where traffic thinned after dark and no one cared who I used to be. I rented a modest place close to work. Fewer rooms, fewer echoes. I learned how to move through evenings without filling them just to prove something. I ate dinner alone without distractions. I slept without waiting for a door to open. I sat at tables without measuring who was missing. What surprised me wasn't the loneliness, But how quickly it passed once I stopped treating it like a problem to solve. Silence became neutral, then useful, then familiar. I didn't become someone new. I became more precise. I noticed how much energy I'd spent maintaining a version of myself that fit into someone else's momentum. Without that pull, my pace settled naturally. I worked. I exercised. I read. I called my parents more often. I let weekends be empty without apologizing for it. Sometimes I still remember that coffee shop. The line, the noise, the way the sentence landed without warning. But I understand now that wasn't the beginning of the end. It was just the first moment the truth spoke out loud. The worst part had already happened long before. It was staying too long in a life where I had quietly stopped existing.